What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with an unplanned monologue. If you're listening to this on YouTube on Thursday night or watching this on YouTube on Thursday night, this is a sneak peek of what will be our Friday episode. So be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, tell all your friends, family members if you've done all that. We're here to talk about the Joel Embiid injury. The Sixers announced that Joel Embiid has an injured lateral meniscus in his left knee and will be out through at least this weekend while a treatment plan is finalized. It does not seem, Woj says, quote, there's still uncertainty about how the Sixers medical staff, several specialists, and Embiid will move forward to treat the injured meniscus. They'll take more time over the next several days to chart a course, end quote. Now, these meniscus, there's replacement, there's repair. Jeff Stotts from In Street Clothes did tweet immediately after this, basically, that this is the second tear in Embiid's left lateral meniscus. He missed the final 37 games of 2016-2017 regular season and ultimately underwent a partial meniscectomy, which is a removal. The location of this latest injury remains the key, per Jeff Stotts, to possible treatment options. And so there's a bunch of different ways that it can go here. Players come back from meniscus tears all the time, whether they're removed, whether they're repaired, reconstruction, whatever. And Embiid is proof of that at all. This is a failure on so many parts that it's not even funny. It's a failure on the NBA. It's a failure on the Sixers. And it's a failure for sure, without question, on the Players Association. But first of all, and people, by the way, who were calling Embiid soft or saying he was ducking the Nuggets a few games ago, you should be ashamed of yourselves. If you haven't come out and apologized and said I got caught up in the moment, if you did that, that's fine. That whole ducking narrative was fucking stupid. And this whole thing bugs the shit out of me. When we talk about players and missing games, the players most of the time are not the ones actively deciding how many games they're going to miss, whether they're going to be rested. They want to play. Go figure. Basketball players, most of them want to play basketball. And so does Embiid have input on whether he should play when it's his body? Yes, of course. Should the Sixers have? Let's start with that game very quickly before we get into the ramifications on what this means for the Sixers and the NBA and the Players Association and how everyone has just failed here. It seems like when you look at that game specifically, Joel Embiid should not have been the one deciding whether he was on the injury report. It's nice that he wanted to play, but when you have reports coming out after the fact from ESPN's Ramona Shelburne that he couldn't even jump, and so why wasn't he listed on the injury report? That's on the Sixers, not even Nick Nurse specifically. It's on the organization, the training staff, the front office, everybody. Part of being in that position is to override your players. It's why when LeBron James received slack for the Russell Westbrook trade in LA, fuck that. That's why you have Rob Pelinka there, is to tell your stars no, to override your stars, because they do not run the organization. Their well-being or the roster's well-being is your primary concern. So he sits out that game, and the discourse is just shameful. The people that thought he was ducking. And Matt Moore of Action Network had the piece about the games that Embiid had missed. Now, that might be notable because he sat out so far against so many really good opponents. Again, that's a decision that's happening with the Sixers, where maybe they decided, hey, we're just going to punt on these games. We want to have you involved in the more winnable ones. Could he have been part of it? Sure. But this is not Joel Embiid deciding, I don't want to play against these teams above 500 on the road. That's just not how most players are wired. So that whole thing was stupid. And Nuggets fans, media members, anyone who called out Joel for being soft or ducking Jokic in Denver. He hasn't played in Denver since before the COVID-19 pandemic. You should be ashamed of yourselves. If you've apologized already, if you were making jokes and you walked them back, fine. But if you haven't apologized, if that's a take that you've decided to die with, or if that's a take that you've just decided to ignore and not acknowledge and backtrack, just admit you were wrong. It was fucking stupid just to think that Joel Embiid, an MVP, who has outplayed Jokic in the regular season on a handful of occasions, didn't want to face Nikola Jokic. Dumb as shit. Then he sits out the Blazers game, and he's playing in the Golden State Warriors game, and he can barely move. This man looked like he was wearing concrete shoes the entire game. He's playing 29 minutes. This is a failure on Nick Nurse, who decides how many minutes his players are going to log on the court. It's a failure for the Sixers training staff for letting Embiid playing or clearing him to play. And I don't want to hear the defense from that I have seen. Well, this is a separate injury. He was just dealing with a sore left knee, and then this meniscus thing happened when it was falling on. I can't even remember who fell on top of him during the Warriors game. I already forgot. It wasn't Kuminga, was it? Who was it? I already forgot. I don't care. He should have been on the court in the first place. You can stop it right there. It wasn't like he was playing. He had a terrible game on offense specifically. Looked like he could barely move. So it wasn't like he was just lighting it up and then he got injured. Just because it's a separate injury, the initial one should have kept him off the court. Why it didn't keep him off the court is beyond me. You have so many failures leading up to that moment where it's, well, who cleared Embiid to play? And if he wasn't technically cleared or you left the decision up to him, whose call was that? The front office, the training staff? Did he say his body was fine? Okay, let's say he was cleared. Medically, it looked fine. He seemed fine. And then he said his body was fine because Joel Embiid wants to play. What is Nick Nurse doing? What are the Sixers could have texted him or one of his assistants when they saw how Joel Embiid was moving and say, get him the fuck out of this game. There's no reason he should have played almost 30 minutes at that point. And especially, look, the Sixers were playing better off without him through certain stretches, in part because of just how much Joel Embiid was laboring on the court through that time. And yes, you would like Embiid to be confident enough or strong-willed enough to say, hey, I can't play. I'm not going to play. But like there's the discourse happening and you're someone who wants to play basketball. This is not a matter of, and now we're going to lead into there's two bigger discussions. What does this mean for the Sixers? If he misses an extended period of time, let's just start there. That impacts what they're going to do with the trade deadline, because with Joel Embiid, they're a contender who should be acting extremely urgently and aggressive. If he's going to miss time through the All-Star break and beyond, if this becomes a 4 to 6 week to 8 week thing, you got to recalibrate now. There's still the urgency because Joel Embiid's prime is just ticking, knowing how, look, he missed the first 2 seasons of his career, then barely played when he was barely played. We only played in like 30 something games when he was a rookie. You're kind of operating with urgency to begin with. That still exists, but your season's kind of in the gutter, or maybe not. He can come back and then dominate again, and maybe he'll be fresher because he got that rest. So do you still act urgently at the deadline? I don't know what opportunities are going to be available to them either. They've needed another shot creator, and if Embiid is going to miss significant time, they need it more than ever if they want to tread water without him and have Tyrese Maxey there when he is healthy. You do have Tobias Harris. You have Nick Batum. It's a lot to place on all of their shoulders just to supplant whatever Joel Embiid's doing. And does it make it more likely that they get attracted to DeJounte Murray? Probably not, just because he's smaller. I wouldn't mind him on the Sixers, though. You can roll him over into a different asset. I would still say no, they're not going to be like part of the Zach LaVine sweepstakes. That would shock me. They maybe look at someone who is lower cost. Perhaps they don't net you a first-round pick, but they give you some additional scoring juice, like a Bojan Bogdanovic, who the Pistons probably want 8 first-round picks for at this point. I don't know. But the Embiid injury timeline, which we don't know at this point, I want to make that clear, is absolutely going to impact how the Sixers act at the trade deadline and then just what happens for the rest of their season and then beyond. Because if this season gets butchered in any way, even if it's just your trade deadline activity where you were hesitant to make a move that you would have made if Joel Embiid was healthy, that's going to open up a weird discussion come time for this offseason when Joel Embiid is surveying his future and considering what needs to happen. Now, he could come back. The Sixers could be as currently constructed. Maybe at that point, maybe they're the 5 seed. Maybe they're the 6 seed, and they're still able to just run through the playoffs, make the conference finals. Everything's hunky-dory. It just gets a lot harder to reach that level when you're already 5th and you have 4 games up on the Pacers in the loss column. Like there's a chance you're not going to fall to 7th. I mean, the Heat would have to go on a real tear and the Magic's offense unless they do something. So you're going to be in the top 6. Your playoff path gets at least a little bit, if not a lot harder for you to sort of grapple with. So that timeline is going to matter. But let's talk about maybe why Embiid is so insistent on playing in the first place. Even though he says winning a title is his main priority, we know he wants another MVP award. And so the NBA institutes this 65-game minimum, which is, the equivalent of about, it's less than 20% of the season. But let's say it's about 20% of the season at that point. They have this minimum. And one, I've seen a lot of people criticize the NBA for this. The NBA deserves criticism. And when the rule first came out, I understood it. I want to see players play. But my bigger issue, and we said this on the podcast, was players, when it comes to load management and the number of games being played in their injuries, most of the time, they're not the ones who are making the call on maintenance and rest nights. I would say 98% of the time, at least, they're not. And so this whole thing to address the issue of, oh, players have to be on the court, that was mandated towards the teams, directed towards the teams. That wasn't about the players specifically. However, for people who are mad at the NBA, at the owner side for putting that through, these things are collectively bargained with the NBA's Players Association. I don't know what the messaging was when this 65 game rule, and there's some flexibility there, but when it comes to injuries and overall availability, it doesn't seem like there's exceptions there. It's more so if there was a catastrophic event, they had a family matter to tend to, or needed to miss time for that, maybe a travel issue, like when DeAndre Ayton was trapped in his house because of an ice storm. So the extenuating circumstances don't apply to injuries. What was the messaging there from the players union to their players? By just, I don't know if they conceded it or if they were just on board with it. Both sides know, owners, the league, and then the players know that this new TV deal is coming. And so you want to maximize the potential for revenue there and get the largest deal possible for however long you're going to sign it. What was the messaging there, though? And now you have an instance where is Embiid on the court because he wants to continue qualifying for the MVP debate, for the All-NBA discussion. Did Tyrese Halliburton try to come back? He did try to come back too early. He played in Siakam's debut when he clearly shouldn't have. So now you have an instance where this 65-game rule is objectively stupid, but everyone fails here because the Players Association allowed this to get through. And it was also just, and this is something, I'll even cop to it. I don't know that I admitted this or realized it at the time. And there's always unintended consequences to when you do something, but you can't be above critique when the people who are getting paid a shit ton of money to understand this stuff better than us don't. And when even then it was fairly clear that they were addressing a superficial issue, unless I'm wrong, because it was a quick scan for this. There's been one player. Let's use the MVP debate as a thing. You need to play in 65 games. Joel Embiid played in 66 last year and made the cut. What you essentially did, there's only been one player in NBA history to win the MVP award while playing in fewer than 65 games or its equivalent, because we had lockout shortened seasons and COVID shortened seasons. It was Bill Walton, played in 58 games, I believe, and won the MVP award. That was in 1978. He did that. So that is the one player to do that. You're fixing an issue that hasn't actually been an issue at all when it comes to choosing awards. Availability has always factored in to the awards. Maybe it's more directed at the All-NBA, the All-Defensive discussions. Even those conversations tend to factor in availability. Even people who just say, well, since value's not caked into it, I'm just looking for the 15 best overall players. You get to a point where it's, let's just use Joel Embiid as an example. 71 games of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at this level is way more valuable over the course of an entire regular season than Joel Embiid at 57 or whatever it ends up being. That's just a matter of fact. And that's going to get caked into an All-NBA discussion, especially now when there are no positions. And that is why I will say maybe players feel added pressure to hit this minimum, is that one, if you're a guard like Halliburton, just more spots are available for you because there are no positions. But when you're a center like Embiid, on the flip side of this, there are more spots available to you, but there could be fewer spots because the three All-NBA teams in years past, it was okay, like you're guaranteed to get the three bigs in there. And when you're at a point, there are a ton of talented big guys here. But when you're looking at pure centers, Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic are probably the only top 15 guaranteed, like pure centers, those big guys. You say they're centers all the time who will be top 15 every single year. And so it was an opportunity for other guys like, we'll say, Anthony Davis, who is a top 15 player, probably in a vacuum, but his availability has always been murky. If he qualified or was listed in the center position, he could play in fewer games and get that center spot. And so do you feel more pressure as a big man to play in the requisite number of games? Because in theory, there's more spots available to you, but not really, because of the way the voting is shaken out and how many guard and forward spots there were available to begin with. And that's an impact of all this, but it's not just on the league. It's on, I know Tyrese Halliburton was pretty critical of the rule, and he's not wrong, but why did the Players Association, like, if this is how most of the players feel, and I honestly don't know, but I would guess that most of them are not, that most of the stars certainly aren't, and maybe there are guys who are, the 37th best player in the NBA, and they kind of like the idea because they're going to play in a crap ton of games, and that'll give them an opportunity to make an All-NBA team. But when you're going to tie contract incentives and values like Halliburton's to making All-NBA, that initial, like that last ditch effort to get there, that is absolutely going to matter. And that is something the players union should have foreseen. It is something the league, I bet you, understood and probably didn't care because of the TV deal that's upcoming and them just wanting to make sure they're selling the best package possible by saying, well, our players play in the middle of January when it matters, especially on national television. And again, the Players Association might have been thinking along the same way. I'm not absolving anyone here. Everybody fucked up. The Sixers, maybe even Joel Embiid, but he's going to be the least culpable in all this, quite frankly. He's not in a position of power on the players union. He can say whatever he wants. He is the star, but it's on the Sixers organization to override him when necessary. And then you have the league and the Players Association, neither of whom seem to have anyone's back in all of this. And so I'm complaining, I'm ranting. I want to make it clear that this is not something I was necessarily pointed out when the new CBA was ratified. Keith Smith and I from Spotrac last season, we did talk about some of the unintended consequences. This came up loosely, but we were open to seeing how this idea played out. I'm going to expect some sort of quick repealment here once the NBA signs its new TV deal, but we can't have and even just the injury reporting rules, which are aimed at, it's not about availability, it's about sports betting, and fuck that. The Sixers should have had him on an injury report because there is a competitive gamesmanship there when you're talking about the Nuggets needing to prepare. But the injury reporting stuff probably has a lot to do with wanting to make sure that the betting markets are you have ties to the sports betting company. I mean, ESPN, there's now a branded ESPN bet, and the league is going to have partnerships with sports betting companies. And so the injury report helps sports betting companies, operators set lines. There's so many cooks in the kitchen right now. And as larger entities, as just larger, as just a larger corporation, as a business, as a league, this is a failure on everyone's behalf. And it's not just about Joel Embiid. It's going to get tied to Tyrese Haliburton. It's going to get tied to other players who you kind of have to monitor and see. And there will be some who just don't give a fuck. Kawhi Leonard's not going to care if he hits the 65-game minimum. He might like to, but he's not going to care. And so players later in their contracts, especially when you're in Tyrese Haliburton, you're about to start your first max, and there is all NBA language in there, that's going to matter more for those types of players than it is going to be for players who are on their third, fourth deals, et cetera. So this should have been realized. And even now, is there no way to just kind of adjust it and get back in a room, or at least we messed up? And so now the competition committee is going to have to figure that out. But the Joel Embiid issue specifically, to where it reached this point to where now he might miss extended time, and maybe he doesn't, but we're all going to question whether he should or not. It reached this point and became exacerbated because of so many different failures. And anyone who's boiling this down to people should have to go to their job, I work when I'm sick, it's just different. You need to have some level of empathy. I know that's what the money is for you to play hurt. But when you're playing hurt to a point where, using Joel Embiid as the primary example, where you actually can't play, it's serving the best interest of nobody, because as much as the NBA wants the regular season to be more relevant, the playoffs matter the most. And a player like Joel Embiid, who has a murky track record in the playoffs when looking at his individual performance, in large part because he's been banged up to high heavens, you need to be looking out for the well-being of these players during the highest stakes moment. And what this is really an indictment of, if you have an issue with players not playing, it's an indictment of, well, it could be two things. The game is just so demanding when you're looking at the styles and the physical anomalies we're dealing with. Joel Embiid's another one. As Tim Bontemps said, he's Kevin Durant plus 100 pounds. When you just look at his footwork, that's not Kevin Durant to a T, but that's what we're dealing with. And so it's not, and I'm not, first of all, Nikola Jokic is an Iron Man, deserves all the credit in the world. And he's anomalous unto himself, but he doesn't move in a physically anomalous fashion. He's more of just a cerebral anomaly and a finesse, inaccuracy, and efficiency phenomenally. And there's but even him, look at him. He's scratched up, within 5 minutes of every game, where he's dealing with scratches and cuts from all these previous games. The game is demanding because of the pace or because of the physical nature of what some guys are doing, especially these bigs who are carrying a bunch of weight on a crap ton of height. It's just demanding. And so you could bemoan, well, yesteryear and there was hand checking, it was more physical then. I don't fucking care. We're dealing with the here and now. The real indictment here is then of the length of the season. If you have an issue with the amount that players are playing, we're not talking about faked injuries every 5 seconds. It's different when you're dealing with tank jobs. And I'm just sorry, you can't pretend to care if you're not going to see Kyle Kuzma play, should he not get traded, from March through the end of the season, because you're not watching the Wizards. I call bullshit if you're going to care about that. Anyway, I'm not defending the league here. I'm yelling at everybody. I'm even yelling at myself a little bit in this, for not having the forethought to think that this 65-game minimum thing could be a disaster. But I'm not even sure if this is about the 65-game minimum thing. Even if it was, even if Joel Embiid is the party that wants to win MVP, qualify for All NBA. As an organization, you need to step in and say, like, no. And so even if you want to absolve the league and the players union a little bit, because it's good that like players understand, maybe there are some who would have appeared and taken some rest nights later in the season or middle of the season. They're not injured, but they had missed 10 games previously, and they're just going to continue to play when they're not injured or when they could have had a rest night because they want to qualify. If you want to absolve them of all blame, then a bulk of the blame needs to fall on the Sixers here now. But anyone who's boiling this down to players should have to do their jobs, you are oversimplifying what is going on here. And there's just been multi layers worth of failure here. And now I don't know what the exact cost is going to be, but we're talking, I'd be shocked if it's just not a matter of weeks, if not months, with Joel Embiid. And this opens up issues elsewhere. And we've already seen it kind of creep into the Tyrese Halliburton stuff specifically because of how good he has been and just looking, he's like inching towards that threshold more so than some of these other players who might factor in there. And then what is this going to do to the discourse where it's, well, is Nikola Jokic or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander the rightful MVP when if Embiid just would have played in whatever games? It almost like it gives you an out there for a problem, like I mentioned before, that you didn't even have because players appearing in fewer than 65 games weren't winning MVP. They weren't really winning Defensive Player of the Year. I'd be shocked if they were, I didn't look, but I'd be shocked if they went, if they were making all NBA teams on a regular basis. So it's just so much of a failure here. And hopefully Joel Embiid is going to be okay. But anyone who, including in the Sixers organization, in the league, and I don't know, I would like to know what the messaging was from the Players Association, or if the players did, if there was widespread approval for it, you're going to have to eat some of your own crow here because like this was collectively bargained. It's not just on the league, and it sucks in general because now, at least in part because of this, whether it was the discourse, Embiid wanting to hit that minimum, it opened the door for issues like this and the additional failures that will be incumbent with them. And I'm looking specifically at what were the Sixers doing? They should be ashamed of themselves for letting Embiid on the court against the Warriors, for not doing a better job of controlling the messaging with his injury, because this was the same knee that was sore. So I don't care if it was a separate injury. He's been rested because of a sore left knee. I've already gone too long on this. If you're new to this channel, this podcast, please remember to subscribe. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify help us a ton. Share our content on Twitter. Share the YouTube links. Tell friends, family members, acquaintances, enemies about us. Recommend us. Really appreciate all the support you can get. Follow us on all the socials. They are on your screen or in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Until next time, and as always, I leave with a shout out to the one, the only, the legendary, the indelible, not so adorable at the moment, but he's playing it smart. He's not trying to make all NBA by hitting the 65 game minimum at all costs. Frank Ntilikina.